Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's guest is the man behind the comic site Bleeding Cool. It's Rich Johnston. Thanks for coming on the show, Rich.
Hey, great to be here.
So, Rich, I want to start at the beginning because I always kind of feel like, I don't think you were like 6 and you were like, you know what I want to do when I grow up is I want to start a comic site that gets into all of the juicy rumors of the comic industry.
You say that. But, I had some interest that way. There was a, well, not quite comics per se, but there was a column in the Guardian newspaper in Britain here called, it was literally the Guardian Diary, and then they had another one called Media Monkey, and it was basically gossip columns, one for politics and one for the media, and I thought they were fantastic. And I basically got into comics and thought there should be something like that that's just for comics. There's something for everything else. I like reading the things that are for everything else. I mean, this is the thing. Trade journals have gossip columns. Carpentry, whatever, plumbing, they've got gossip columns in their trade journals. And it was just the realization that there really wasn't much for comics. And I think they should be. And so then there was.
Well, I think it's funny because I think sometimes when people get offended by your work, it's, I've spent a lot of time in England, and there's a huge difference in the way things are reported there versus America. and I remember because I was staying with some people in Virginia Water outside of London, and I would take the train every night and I would come back over to Virginia Water. And as I'm going, I'd be reading that evening paper they have. And half the articles were about who random footballers were sleeping with.
That's true.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like I sometimes think the reason why Bleeding Cool can be so jarring for some is because they're not used to seeing this stuff in comics or even in American culture, because that's kind of not a thing.
I mean, really, I think it's a lot of intelligent stuff done that way in America. I mean, you can dismiss things like the Weekly World News, the National Enquirer, but things like page 6 in New York, Times, that kind of thing. There seems to be that kind of culture. I mean, I think about especially LA and Hollywood, a lot of Variety and the like. There's a lot of that kind of commentary on the entertainment media. Okay, admittedly, they just didn't care about comics, so you never got the stories about comics because who cares? What I was trying to do, I was just trying to treat comics like any other entertainment medium. But you're right. I mean, there's a certain lack of seriousness that I think British reporting media can sometimes take about politics, entertainment, that kind of thing. As you said, national sports, which I think we might have actually infected certain parts of America since.
Oh, totally.
But yeah, I don't think it's like that. I mean, I've always thought that the news should be informative and entertaining at the same time. I mean, I've always found the stuff that I'll remember most will be the stuff that's entertained me most as well. I mean, and I can't. I mean, America's discovered things like The Daily Show,
right,
or The Onion, or things like that. I mean, it was the idea that a lot of people get their news from shows like The Daily Show. Yeah. And some people find that worrying. And I thought, well, no, I don't find that worrying at all. I think that's just another way of transmitting information.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, I'm the most horrifically or uninformed person in the United States, which is probably saying something. And most of my information comes from the HBO show Last Week Tonight from John Oliver.
Right.
And that's done in a humorous way, and it's being delivered it's delivering real news, but in an entertaining way. But I think the difference between British culture and the U.S. culture is in the U.S. it's much more niche, and then it's so pervasive in England.
Okay, I think that's fair. More people, I guess, read the news. Just as it's probably going to be slightly more tabloid here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit more tabloidy there. But so I want to ask you a question about your kind of role in this world of comics, because I read this old comics journal piece on you. It's not old. I mean, it was 10 years ago. So and I thought it was interesting. You refer to yourself as an entertainer, not a journalist. Why is that?
Oh, okay. This goes back to a lot of it's down to me knowing lots of journalists, especially when I was growing up, and me not wanting to be one of them. All this stuff about the phone hacking and things. I mean, I knew all about that, but that's just it wasn't even a secret. It was not an open secret. Everyone knew there were things you did to get stories, and I didn't particularly like that. Also, the kind of stuff people do, like doorstepping grieving relatives, that kind of thing.
I hate that.
As a part of a journalistic job, it's part of your duty. You have to, and it's I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't like to do that kind of thing. And then that's from the British side, I guess. And then from the American side, Americans seem to hold journalism up as some highfalutin achievement or a standard. And there are certain things that are, this is good journalism and this is bad journalism, and it has to be, there can't be any biases, it all has to be balanced, there can't be any other kind of viewpoints. And I didn't like that either.
Mm-hmm.
And all these kind of rules and regulations in order to be a good journalist, I really didn't like that. I much preferred it being a more of a, this is a big thing. In Britain, I guess, journalism is considered a trade. It's a job. In
Mm-hmm.
America, it seems to be like a vocation, a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I much prefer it as a trade, as a job that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So while I might be happy to call myself a journalist or a tabloid journalist or whatever you want in Britain, in America, it feels wrong. I don't want to have those kind of strictures that seems to be imposed. So I prefer a reporter, if you're going to push it. But, you know, an entertainer will also work. It means that I can write about these things without having these kind of strictures, which I think give a false sense of accomplishment and achievement, and then also restrain and constrain what you do. Most journalism these days has become more journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly look at a lot of the reportage in the comic book industry, and so much of it is press releases. Now, that have always got a place. It's always interesting to have those kind of information put out there. But when it just becomes that, and when people won't run specific stories because that means they won't get the exclusive press releases in the future, that's when it all kind of falls apart for me. So I think a lot of what people are attached to the word journalist is false and fake.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want any part of that.
Oh, well, I think it's funny that you're saying that to the person who is like, I only write 3 articles a week and all of them are heavily researched and this and that. So you're basically speaking to the idealized form of exactly what you're talking about. Not that I'm upset by it anyway.
In fact, does that pay you a living?
We talked about this before. No, not at all. And but that's the thing though, is
it's not a trade. It's not in that case. Can that be a professional trade, a professional job? I mean, I'm talking about it as a job. Something that you're living at, something that you can, or you could earn a living at.
No, and nor is it something I'm trying to. Actually, interestingly enough, you used to work in the advertising industry as a copywriter. I work in the advertising industry in like online and social media. So like that's my trade. And and that's the thing though, is like I would never like belabor or like downplay what you do, just because I don't know. I mean, one thing, not to prop you up too much, Rich, but I respect what you do because you own what you do and you never try to be something that you're not, which I think is like, a lot, like you're saying, a lot of sites just do press releases and a lot of ones won't run stories because they, fear ramifications of their actions and stuff. And I find that to be like, I would never hold back on a story just because I think that somebody's gonna be mad at me or something like that. If there's something that's needs to be told, it needs to be told. Granted, I wouldn't run like the, rumors about like DC Rebirth stuff or anything like that, but that's just because that's not like the angle for my site. But that's one thing I want to ask you about is
I'm interested to know why you wouldn't, when it's if every single comic book creator you talk to is telling you about this.
Oh, because
point about why you wouldn't run that story.
I'm not a news site. It's not what I do. I'm not. That's not the objective for my site.
I would say if you found this stuff interesting, you consider it to be newsworthy, not newsworthy, but just something to write about.
Well, I mean, if it was something that I could actually do something more with, and I could like actually build a larger story, then yeah, I would probably do something with it. But if it was just like, I don't know, like Rob Granito is going to be drawing Deathstroke in DC Rebirth, I probably wouldn't do that.
I tell you what, if he was. That would be an amazing story.
That would be like such an impressive niche for you. You would be all over that story way before I got to it.
Did you ever see the one I did when Josh Hoops was going to be working with Rob Granito? My head almost exploded.
Yeah.
That was the perfect Bleeding Cool story. I couldn't believe that was happening. And
it was actually like fiction almost, but not saying it was, but it just feels like fiction.
True.
But what I was going to ask you though is like, so I've said my objective, I have this grandiose objective of just doing these big research articles, and I do it because I'm in, like, it's just kind of what I'm interested in. But you're interested in the reporting. I don't want to say gossip columnist, but in the vicinity of that.
Oh, you can say that. I've got no problems with that.
But what would you say your objective with Bleeding Cool is? Like, do you have a mission statement, or is that too journalistic for you?
No, I think there are some mission statements. I'm not sure if we always live up to them, but there's very much the idea of trying to represent the comic book fan in amongst the industry, trying to, if they want to know stuff about what's going on, it's trying to find out for them. It's trying to lift the curtain on certain aspects of the industry that they love. And I love. It's trying to gain a greater understanding, both in general and specific. What's going on? When's it going to be going on? How's it going to affect me as a reader? What am I going to be able to buy? What can I start planning for now? And also a greater understanding of how things work, why things work the way they do, why has Fantastic Four been cancelled, what is going on, who is to blame, what can I do about it? So it's very much trying to be a champion for the comic book fan, I guess. And there you go. That sounds like a fair mission statement for me.
No, yeah, that sounds great. And I do think it's funny that you said lifting a curtain, given that the DC Rebirth is like right across a curtain.
Oh, I loved that when that happened. Yeah.
You did it. You did it.
You know how fast that. I mean, that was one of those things. I actually did a Google search for curtain, and that was the first image that came up.
Really?
On Google. Yeah, that was put up quickly. That was put up very quickly.
That is amazing. That is really amazing.
See how quickly DC turned around on that one.
I would love to know whether or not your like story on them rebooting or relaunching or whatever you want to call it, rebirthing, was actually the impetus for them doing that. I mean, I don't.
Oh, it was. Oh, absolutely. Yes, that would not have been released that day. That image wouldn't have existed. They've had another one. I mean, it's far too soon. I mean, this is the stuff they'll be talking about in June. They're only starting to show off the May covers and things now. No, absolutely that would not have happened without. I mean, I got in touch with them, just letting them know it was coming, and it was running through the day. And then that day they put up that piece.
And they were like, "Shit, let's find some curtains and put up a hashtag over it."
Listen, I've got to say, it was a good way of owning it. It was the way of basically. I think I didn't have the title. By the end of that day, I would have had the title Rebirth. So there's very much the idea that they got that out first.
Yeah. Well, you got to get in front of a story, especially when it comes out like that. But
I think so. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah. So one thing I want to ask is, like, we were kind of talking about this before, but I think in a weird way, the world of journalism, like even in America, the one like it's no longer that idealized form, because there's so much that's just built on getting out news faster, and it's less about getting it correct and more about getting the amorphous blob of the idea of the story out there.
That's been called the first draft of history.
Is that what they officially call it?
It has. It's been. I've had that thrown at me a few times, and I quite like it. And I'm quite happy to play that role.
Well, but that's the interesting though is like, so you play that role, but it seems like even like you look at like CBR, not to cast aspersions at CBR, but you
cast.
So you post like a story, like one of your stories about DC Rebirth, and then they run it as a story with Report X, and it's interesting because I think.
Well, you know why? Why is because they know that story already. CBR know that. They've been told by the PR people. They've been in chats with creators. They've been lining up interviews for when it's officially announced. They know all this stuff. They're just not running it yet.
So is the idea that they put Report there just so they could have some defense, being like, sorry, DC, this has already been kind of the cat's out of the bag?
Oh, I've been told by certain people that other websites are waiting for me to run the story. Because when I do, then they can run it themselves without getting in too much trouble from Marvel and DC. But if they run it beforehand, then they will. If they run it afterwards, like, oh no, but we have to because Bleeding Cool has already run it. And it doesn't matter where else it's run as well. That's the other thing. If it's on Reddit or it's on message boards or 4chan or wherever it might be, NeoGAF, that doesn't make an issue. But if it goes into Bleeding Cool, then they can basically run it. I think they have that kind of agreement going on. So yeah, if it goes on Bleeding Cool, then you can run it. But until then, you're embargoed until June. That kind of thing. So, and I've been told that directly by some people. So yeah, I guess that's sometimes how it works.
So maybe
sometimes these sites actually really like the fact that I run the story, because then they get to.
That's awesome.
And it doesn't happen often, but I've been told by a site that we're sitting on this story which we can't run yet. Do you want to look into it?
Oh my God!
Of course I do. Obviously I do. So yeah, that has happened before now.
So so maybe I'm waiting for you to get to that Rob Granito Deathstroke story and you don't even know it. So I wanted to ask, okay, so you are the god of all that is rumors in comics.
I wish. I have the crumbs. I just make it look like I've got the whole loaf, you know?
But is that your only job? Do you live off that?
That is, I'm paid a salary by Avatar Press to write Bleeding Cool, and the site makes money, so that's good. I don't think it makes a lot of money, but
It makes enough.
Going, it makes enough for them. I think it's all privately owned. There's no shareholders demanding increases in productivity year on year, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think for Avatar Press, they're very happy to have that, and they know that I'll always run an Avatar story whenever they need one running. If they've got something they want to push or promote, I'll put up a PR thing. I used to call it Avatar Plug of the Week. I think I'm a little bit more subtle these days. But yeah, I mean, I think they're quite happy to have that arm to their publisher. But there's very little. There's very little in terms of actual involvement day to day. I very rarely hear from Avatar. I think today they said, we're going to go to this London Super Comic Con. Can you get something up about the show? And so like, well, yeah, I'm going as well. I already am. So I'll make sure it goes up today instead of tomorrow, or that kind of thing. But there's very little
oversight.
It really is quite, I know, it's quite good. Sometimes, mostly if it's a legal issue. If I see something coming up the street where I think, it could be legally dodgy, that could be a problem, then it goes to their lawyers, and I'll get told this, that, or the other, or you can do it in this way, but not that way. Again, that's very useful, having access to lawyers. That's wonderful. That gives me a certain kind of protection and knowledge base that I can draw on.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like something that a lot of people could use that are, telling stories in comics these days. But, so here's an interesting question for you. And I'm sure you've been asked this a bunch, but let's say theoretically, all right, we're just going to keep using Rob Granito as the example because it's fun.
Hey, why not?
Okay, so let's say you get this hot, juicy rumor that for some reason Rob Granito is now going to be the CEO of Avatar Press. Okay.
Yes.
Now, and like no one's got this. They haven't told you this. They won't respond to you when you're saying that. What happens? If you get a juicy rumor about Avatar, would you run that or would you bury that?
Well, what's the source? Is the source correct? I mean,
let's say the source is credible. Let's say it's Rob. Okay, that's not Rob Granito. That's a horribly disreputable source.
What I'd always do is I'd go to the people that's involved and said, I've got this. This is a story. And the nice thing about William has said is, if I've ever got an Avatar story about him, he'll respond to it, but I can still run it. He's never had a problem that way. So that's quite useful. But yeah, I would basically say this. I've got this story. This is going to be happening. And he'd go, oh, bloody hell, Richard. He wouldn't say that, but words like that. Okay, well, you've got it. I suppose if he takes the opinion, if I've got it, then someone else is going to have it. So he might as well get it out there the way he gives me his spin on it, his interpretation. And I'm happy to run that as well. I went to this person, they said this.
Right.
But they're very much of the opinion that if I hear about it, then other people will hear about it eventually.
So in a way, they're getting in front of the story by going through you.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, that's true about anyone.
Yeah.
And to anyone, and with anyone. I mean, there are people who are happy to talk to me. I'm happy to put their point of view forward, put their version. I mean, I often hold stories just because I'm waiting for their version, their comments to come through. I'm not just rushing straight to press. I would like to be if I can be balanced, I'd like to be balanced. I can't always be balanced, but if I can, I'd like to be. And I give people the opportunity, at least. They often don't take it, but I like to at least give them the opportunity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know I've seen in articles where you're like, DC has declined for comment or things like that. So, I mean,
I don't bother that. If I don't put that doesn't appear, they have already had, because it's just boring to type that out 7 times a day. But yeah, I mean, it's usually if they've commented, then I'll definitely put that in there because like, ooh, that's new.
See, what you need to do is you need to just have like a template where you just click on like DC rumor, and then it just fills DC has declined to comment, and then you don't even have to type that anymore.
That's a good idea. I should look into that.
So I want to ask you about sources. I'm just curious, like how many emails do you get a day? Because it seems like you have like a crazy amount of sources come in. Do you just you start writing an email and then you get 50 more emails? Is that your life?
That is kind of it. I mean, I'm on about 1,000 emails a day at the moment. I think about 500-600 will be useful to some degree.
Like there's an inkling of an idea there.
Yeah, or there's something that I need to talk about, and we can. I mean, a lot of it isn't. A lot of stuff goes straight into the bin, and that's mostly press releases, which is quite handy because they mostly say they're press releases, and I like that because it means I can just like delete them all in one easy go. But yes, there's lots of people I'm talking to on email, instant messaging, Facebook, Twitter direct messaging. There's people find me in all sorts of ways, and so I'm constantly. I've got all these conversations going on all the time. I've got about as we're sitting here, I know there's a good 3 big conversations that I'm currently having with a couple of major publishers about stories that will hopefully be running next week if they all come together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, you just have like the delete all press release and everything like that. How do you like delineate between like what's good and what's bad, what's useful and what's not?
Oh,
is it like instinct?
The only way I can, does it interest me?
Mm-hmm.
And if it interests me, that means go straight to the pile, stop the pile, which is useful. And the other thing, which I can't deny, is did people care about this the last time I ran something like this? There's something I've called go for a second bite of the cherry. If you write a story which so many people respond to, I always see, well, can I get a different angle on what we've just run? Is there something else I can write about this? Because clearly people really love this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got about 20 stories out of Rob Granito in that first week. Maybe a little less, maybe a little longer.
Clearly it's something I still appreciate.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, I tell you, and it's becoming our shorthand. Whenever we get someone who's just like ripping off a huge amount of artists and presenting it as his own work or her own work and putting it on display or selling it online, it's easy just to call them, the Canadian Rob Granito or the Texan Rob Granito.
That's
that
awesome.
Kind of thing. It's just it's become a shorthand now.
Mm-hmm. So is the reason why you're not interested in press releases because you just basically don't have interest in stories that other people are going to be telling?
Partially. I mean, there has to be. I mean, I will run stuff based on press releases sometimes. I can't deny I won't. But I would hopefully have an angle, or I'd see something that other people haven't seen. I'd like at least when you come to Bleeding Cool and you read my stuff, you're going to pick up something you haven't got elsewhere. And sometimes it's just so much of the press release stuff you get is just utterly, utterly dull. Here's a letterless preview of a comic book that's coming out in 5 weeks from Marvel, and there's nothing there apart from that. It's just so dull. So a lot of that stuff just gets binned completely. However, sometimes there'll be something in there that I'll have a little look at and think, maybe they didn't realize the implications of running that panel there, because that means all sorts of interesting things. And that I can then put in the headline.
So it's not quite a delete all. It's more like you go through the ones that you might be potentially interested in and try to see if there's an angle there.
Absolutely. And sometimes I'm sure I'll miss stuff. I mean, that does happen, I know. But hopefully not too much.
So we talked about this a bit before we got started, but I think one of the interesting things about where you're coming from is, I mean, you're in England. You're 4 hours or 5 hours ahead of the publishers in New York. And
are the comic shops open on a Wednesday morning 5 hours before the ones in New York? That is my greatest secret weapon.
That's like your superpower, basically, is just not being in the United States.
Well, no, it's more like I can go to the comic shop and pick up that week's comics at 5 in the morning ET. So a New York time, so it means I can sit down with a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and a sandwich, read through the day's comics and think, there's a story there. And that's why, I mean, Wednesday morning is always the biggest on Bleeding Cool every day. And that's where all the big stories suddenly start to boom out, because I've just got the comics,
right?
And I've read them, and they're really interesting.
I think it's kind of funny that I think you've actually probably read like more comics than I buy in a week by the time I wake up on Wednesday.
There you go. There you go. I think the most popular column on the site is still the X thoughts about X comics.
Really?
Thing. Yeah.
You mean just consistently, or like overall, it's like the biggest?
Oh, consistently every week. The biggest. The biggest regular column. The stories will be bigger, but that X thoughts thing that gets an awful lot of people. They just treat it almost like Ozymandias' wall of television, I think. They look at it and it's like, I'm going to the comic shop. I know I'm going to be buying these 3 comics. What else might I be buying? And they just see like 30 panels with some sardonic comment next to each one, and they go, I like that. That looks interesting from Boom, or that looks interesting from Cinescope, or whatever. I might add that to the pile. So it's become quite a popular column, not just for readers, but retailers seem to really quite like it as well. It gives them as well the idea of what people might be talking about when they come in through the door. So again, it's the first draft of history thing again. It's I basically can pick up a few things that people might be talking about that Wednesday, and they can get ahead of them.
I gotta say, I have conflicted feelings about that, because on one hand, like I think it's kind of cool, because like when I stopped reading comics from like, I don't know, there was like a 4 or 5 year period. And then when I came in right around Infinite Crisis, and I actually used Wikipedia to try to understand what the hell was going on in DC. And in a weird way, it's kind of like you said, the Ozymandias wall of TVs. It's like a way to understand kind of what's going on in a rough approximation of the thing in a Wikipedia sort of way. And but at the same time, like, I always feel really weird about some of the articles you do that involve like spoilers for the day's comics, just because I mean, because like I said, I'm not even awake by the time you're running this article, and I'm like, damn you,
Well,
Rich
I
Johnston.
hope you're not reading the article. It's got a big spoiler
I
warning on
read
it.
all of your articles, Rich. You ruined me. You ruined me.
Why do you do it? Then you have no one to blame but yourself. You
I'm
can't blame.
kidding. I'm kidding. I don't do that. That'd be stupid.
You know what I mean?
But it is just kind of interesting that like you actually run articles that have spoilers for like the day's comics, and I guess some people like that.
They're measured. I'd say they're always measured. Most of the big spoilers I'm not going to be running, and there has to be a real newsworthy reason or a specific spin on it that means I'll run a last page spoiler, for example. There has to be a really, really good reason to do that, and it's
Sure.
it's rare that happens. Aspects of the comics, yeah, I might pick up those. Sometimes that's a reason for someone to actually buy it in the first place.
Sure.
Something to this is an interesting comic because this happens in it,
Mm-hmm.
and you would not have picked it up otherwise. But these will always be spoiler warned, whatever the word is.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Spoiler alerted. Yes. So people will be if you're already going to be buying Batman that week, that day, why on earth would you look in the big Batman spoiler post? You wouldn't. If you weren't going to, maybe you might. It might give you a reason to actually pick the comic up itself. So I don't particularly see a big problem. I said it's all about finding the balance, finding what specific spoiler you use and you run, if you do at all. And sometimes it's the case of no one is going to read this comic book unless they know about this very specific thing that happens on the last page.
Yeah.
And yeah, in that case, I think this is worth it. Let's go for it. But always with heavy spoiler warnings, always with people saying, you know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to find a balancing act, and mostly it seems to work. I've talked with the publishers as well. They don't seem to object to this kind of stuff anymore. We've talked through things in the past. Marvel's kind of say, if it's anything on Wednesday morning, it's fine. We don't care anymore. Anything you do is fine. As long as it's spoiler warned, we're not going to complain. That's fine. DC, they seem to take the approach that any spoiler at all, they consider as good promotion for the comic book. I spoil far less than the publishers would be happy with, if that makes any sense.
Well, and it's not like
I'm going to step over the line. Occasionally, I'm going to make a mistake, and that does happen very occasionally, I think. But it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
Still got the spoiler warning.
I do have to say, sometimes they actually, I mean, like they spoil their own comics all the time. I mean, it's like comics are coming out on Wednesday, and they're like, Tuesday, Human Torch is dead. I'm like, what?
Yes, that's a headline in the New York Times. No spoiler warning.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the stuff that sends people insane.
I don't understand why they do that.
I mean, for example, the one. And sometimes I can be a bit cute. I do remember the one. I think was it Batman first issue of Batman Eternal, or whichever one it was, where Spoiler, the character, arrived after spending so many years in the DC wilderness.
Of course you did that, Rich. Of course you did.
Major spoiler appears in this week's Batman Eternal.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was spoiler. It was appearing. So it's one of my favourite headlines to have written. But yeah, it's all about trying to find a balance, and I hope I don't overstep it. If I do, I kind of hear about it.
Right.
But generally, I don't. Generally, people seem to find that level. I generally judge it well, it seems. Sometimes people get pissed. Some people get very pissed when other people repost things that I've run.
Right.
But without spoiler warnings. They'll put it up on Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
Right.
And then those people get mad with me. But strangely, not the people who actually posted that on Twitter or Facebook.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm an easier target, I guess.
I do have to say I prefer your method to, like, lately CBR has been like, they use that freaking breaking news thing like for everything at this point. And
yes.
And they have like breaking Arrow, like Ollie Queen dies or something like that. I'm just like, really? You just like spoil the ending in the breaking thing that like everyone sees? That sucks.
I don't think CBR have found the balance yet. I mean, they have started, and Newsarama, they've started basically, because Bleeding Cool does what Bleeding Cool does, they've also started getting into the business of doing it as well. Mm-hmm. Doing it maybe a tiny bit later, like an hour later than when I would. And they'll be less careful with their spoilers as well. And I also think sometimes the judgment is a bit off. There was one where, that was it. It was an Extraordinary X-Men, and Cyclops appears at the end of Extraordinary X-Men in the middle of Mr. Sinister's lab. and obviously clearly a clone because that's what Mr. Sinister does.
Right.
I didn't even bother mentioning it. It was just like such an obvious.
That's just kind of his thing.
8 a.m. CBR had the Cyclops alive kind of thing. I'm like, no, he's not. Someone has just looked at the last page of the comic and not actually read it. and
you read them at least.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually, I have a friend, I believe the reason why he picked up some comic from DC, like I think it was around Convergence, was because Booster Gold appeared at like the end of it. And he's a huge Booster Gold fan. And I think he saw that and he's like, shit, now I got to buy this comic.
No, that's right. There were some things that if you're originally going to buy that comic and you have a spoiler warning saying this will spoil it for you, then that's fair enough. But yeah, that's one. We definitely ran this is for the fans of Booster Gold kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So back to your hours though, like, do you just have batshit crazy hours?
Yes, batshit crazy hours. I start work mostly about 8 a.m. and I'll finish mostly about 2 a.m.
My God.
There are some. That's not always the case. Sometimes I'm sleeping late. Sometimes I'm crashing early. But that's generally about where it goes.
I hope you like coffee.
Tea.
Oh, okay.
Tea is also heavily caffeinated, so that's excellent. But no, the job I do has certain hours, but they're not all constantly spent working. One of the nice aspects of working from home like this is I have 2 young children, and I get to spend time with them. I get to take them to school, bring them back from school, when they're not at school, play with them, do their homework, cook for them, chat with them, watch episodes of Steven Universe with them. So there's lots of stuff I get to do more with my kids. Working in advertising, that never happened. I'd be leaving the house at 7:30 in the morning, and I'd be getting back at 8 o'clock in the evening, and I wouldn't see them. I'd only see them at weekends. And so this job, even though the hours are far more than any human should have to work, I do get to spend a lot more time with my kids, and for me, that's absolutely worth it.
And you actually filmed probably the most adorable unboxing video that's ever existed with your kids. I think you posted on your site like a week or 2 ago as like some.
I reposted it because someone had just mentioned it to me again. I thought I should put this one up again.
That was so freaking adorable.
Hilarious.
Yeah, that was one of the most adorable, definitely the most adorable unboxing video I've ever seen.
Yeah, if everyone wants to find it, I think it's called Eve Opens the Box.
All right.
And it's my daughter opening a box of freebies sent by DC Comics a few years ago when Alex Segura was still a PR guy there.
Such a nice guy.
Yeah, and it starts off with I say Eve taking issue with the logo, which was the one previous to the current one, and she insisted that it wasn't DC Comics, it was DG Comics, and she wouldn't refer to them as anything else. And then she wasn't really happy with a lot of the things that were inside the box, which were all the kids' favourite stuff that were meant to be aimed at her, and she wasn't having any of it. And it just goes from there. And yeah, I had no idea that was going to happen. And I'm so pleased it did, because it's just the funniest thing.
It was pretty fantastic. But okay, so I want to get back to the DC Rebirth stuff. And I want to talk about it as a just kind of about how you break a news story. So for the DC Rebirth stuff you've been dropping, like what's your bar for substantiation? Like what do you need to have to run with something?
Okay, because it was interesting. There were a number of different sources for the DC Rebirth stories, and the stories I ran depended mostly on that source, whichever one it was. So I started to hear some stuff, I think, from some of the creators initially, and I was running some stuff earlier in the year about how something was happening in June, and it looked like they were going to be relaunching. All the titles were going to change their title and start from a new issue 1. I didn't know it was going to be new creative teams then. But that starts to come through, and they're coming from creatives who are telling me bits and pieces. An editor here, another publisher who can't get, who one of their creators they can't get because they're doing this new project.
Sure.
They then tell me about that new project, that kind of thing. So I start to build up these few bits and pieces, and then it's just started to come a lot heavier. And so piece by piece, I come, this is going to be part of this story. This isn't just standing on its own. That Scott Snyder is moving from Batman to Detective Comics. That's just one aspect of everything that's happening. And so I was able to see, well, basically, I'm able to get a few of the pieces. I still haven't got anything near the picture, but I've got a few edges. And I've definitely got some of the blue bits, so I can see where it's going. And then I start to get more sources from other. Once I start running that story, other people start to pop in and say, "Oh, I knew all about that. They're doing this as well." Oh, and I think, that's useful. And most of these people who I know. And then I got a source, someone totally anonymous, but claiming they worked in DC, and they gave me a bunch of stuff, like a big email with a bunch of things. And I was like, see, I know 2 of those things are true because I've already got stories running on those, but that could have been guesswork. So I then start to run them past a couple of people and saying, have you seen this? What do you think? And they say, well, that bit sounds true. In fact, and I know that other bit is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually I go, there's enough. There's enough corroboration from enough people. So if they can say a third of this is true, odds are the other 2/3 is. But I have to at least tell people this because I can't. This is a new source. Only had something from him once or her, never again.
So basically, you're finding like a source, and then you're kind of cross corroborating based off of people you have already.
But when I then run that story, and it's some of the aspects have only come from this person, like say Peter Tomasi writing Superman, that only came from this source. I couch it in that. I say, here's this source. Don't know who they are. A lot of their stuff has been checking out, but bear this in mind. This is not from a approved source. Most of the stuff I get are from people who should know, and I know should know because of the position they're in. This one wasn't. This one was just out of the blue, and often when that happens, I might test them with something. And in this case, I said, "Can you tell me the endings to a couple of DC comic books coming out next week?"
Oh, right.
And so then I sat because that was
with your tea.
That was the Thursday. So I sat and I waited until Wednesday morning, and I picked up those comics and I looked at them and was like, every single thing is in that last page is what this person said.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, actually, no, it wasn't on the Wednesday. It must have been on the Tuesday. I asked a retailer to check the last pages of these comics for me, if he would, and he did, and it all panned out. So it's like, okay, I think I can now go ahead and run these stories. So doing tests for certain people, if they're anonymous, is very, very useful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and that was one thing I was going to ask about is, it must. It seems like a lot of times you're primarily trading. It's not purely anonymous sources, but it's a lot of sources that you can't really name. And
yeah, absolutely. People who tell me stuff, and they wouldn't want to be named. They may get in trouble with their bosses. They may lose work, but they want stuff to be told or other people to know things. So yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, do you feel like, because I know you get guff all the time from all kinds of different sources. Do you feel like that's one of the big reasons is that you have in the general perspective not legitimate sources, or do you think that's unrelated?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I would say that. Well, here's a not too secret. A good couple of people who give me an absolute immense amount of guff online, as you put it, are actually sources of mine. No, I mean, it's a really good way to hide in plain sight. This Rich Johnston is a terrible man. Don't believe anything he says. Scum of the earth. Hey, Rich, I just heard this. Now, you don't mind if I say all these other things about you, do you? No, good. Okay, that's fine. He's an awful man. Oh, don't believe anything he says.
Oh,
that
my
happens,
God.
and that has constantly happened for over 20 years of doing this. Certain people will happily slag me off in one scenario and then as cover. And I'm happy with that. There's nothing doing it. I mean, that's not going to pour suspicion on anyone because there's plenty of people doing that. So
humans are hilarious. I was actually going to ask you because it does kind of seem like there's this weird dichotomy where it's like one day I see somebody being like, screw Bleeding Cool, they're the worst, and the next day like, check out this link from Bleeding Cool.
I'm very useful when it comes. There's one creator, I won't specifically name him, but he gives me an awful lot of stick online or about whatever it may be that day, and yet if I've put up some information that's useful for him to win an argument, then he's happy to. It's like, look at this. See, that proves I'm right. And it's like, yeah, but it's the person you said is terrible. Look, people are inconsistent. People do what they do in the spur of the moment, and they have all sorts of motivations. Sometimes they're transparent, sometimes they're not. I've been doing this now for over 20 years. People come, people go. I'm pretty immune to the slings and arrows, I guess. I've only been actually physically assaulted once by a comic book professional for something I've written, and they were then fired off their DC comic when they started boasting about it at the DC party. So karma has its way, I guess. Let's play. And I mean, this is what it comes down to. I'm actually Bleeding Cool is 7 years old. It's funded by the comic book industry, whether that's publishers who advertise on it or Avatar who publishes it. I have no denials. I am part of the institution that I am. Reporting on and pulling apart and things. I'm just as part of that as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm definitely, subject to that kind of criticism as well. I'd be hypocritical if I objected to it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you again about going back to DC Rebirth. I know one of your stories you had to take down, and from what I understand, it was basically, you were asked to take it down.
Yeah.
And
I'd given DC a hell of a day.
Yeah.
And when they called up and said, this story, could you take it down? It's like, I've put 12 stories. Yeah, that's fair enough. I'll take that one down. I was feeling magnanimous. had a very good day, and they asked, and I said, yeah, because they asked. That's another thing. I'm often happy to do things that people ask me.
But not if they like threaten you with legal action or something
exactly.
like that.
That's the kind of thing. That's when I'll dig my heels in and I'll point out how wrong they are. And yeah, but if someone actually emails me and say, Rich, this is causing a lot of problems, we'd really appreciate it if you took it down. Or yeah, I mean, I'd be very happy to. Certainly.
So how often are you asked to take stories down? Like roughly speaking, like every day?
No. It happens. It doesn't happen a lot. Couple of times the last couple of weeks. But yeah, maybe once a week at the max, and sometimes not even that.
Mm-hmm. So, you, besides being the man behind Bleeding Cool, I mean, you're obviously a comic book fan yourself, and you know a lot about this stuff. You know the industry, you know people within the industry. I'm curious, why do you think, we don't know exactly what it looks like, but why do you think DC is going this route?
Pressure of low sales, pressure of low market share, a desire to punch back a bit, and it works. That's the other thing. They found that it's worked for them in the past, so they're going to do it again because it's what works.
Right.
Rule 1: do what works. It's quite fun. I was reading the David Gabriel piece he gave to Diamond, and he was bemoaning. He was like, how terrible thing all these reboots and relaunches are. And like that thing that we did back in October, no, that wasn't a reboot or a relaunch. That was a refresh. Refreshing is fine, but relaunching, that's the devil's work. It was what? That was very, very funny. But it's the model that works. There are problems. There are diminishing returns. It's not the kind of model that can hold up, I guess, forever.
Right.
But right now, it's what people respond to. So that's what they're going to do.
Right.
They obviously can't do it too much. I mean, to be fair, DC haven't actually done this since 2011, which, as I point out to people, was 5 years ago. So it's not like they're doing it every 9 months. So it is different.
I do think it's interesting that, 5 years seems like a long time now, considering like all the other refreshes that are happening around there.
Yeah, Marvel have refreshed 3 times during that period.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, to say the word refresh, it feels weird in the mouth. It's like some kind of strange, I don't know, a feminine hygiene product being advertised. That's how it appears to me now. It's the blue. Anyway, let's leave that behind.
It definitely requires some semantic gymnastics to make that type of thing happen.
It does, and I do like that. I have to say, sometimes it's all down to the language. I mean, Marvel, their language, their PR language is amazing. The hoops that Tom Brevoort went through, it is denials that they were cancelling Fantastic Four, or it might have something to do with Fox, or anything like that, were hilarious to watch. But he never, ever told a lie. He just skated around it beautifully. He'd say things that you could attribute to what was happening, but you didn't have to. They could have just been statements that had nothing to do with events. He's a master of that kind of thing.
I saw this one the other day from him it was from a while ago, but it was like from this angry fan who was talking to him on his Forum Spring, and he was like, you said that you weren't going to do this, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, no, you asked 18 months ago if we're going to cancel in a year, and we didn't. 6 months ago, Fantastic Four still had a title. Now they don't. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, you are...
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
How is he not a lawyer?
Yeah, he knew exactly what was happening. He used... I mean, we did this piece where we actually just took apart, sentence by sentence, everything he was saying and how it had no relevance to what he was replying to. Because But everybody else took it as confirmation that Bleeding Cool was just talking nonsense. And yeah, it's quite wonderful. I think I remember a line he said something. Seriously, would anyone have known anything was going on if it wasn't for this website? I took that and I put that on our front page because it felt like a testimonial more than anything.
Yeah, you should make that like a tagline for your site. Tom Brevoort, would you know anything was happening if it weren't for this website?
I'm thinking about using it as T-shirts for San Diego this year. So,
excellent. Okay, I got to ask you about your readers.
Yes.
For some reason, called them little bleeders, which I think is so disgusting. Why do you call them that?
Well, it's more like people who sent in stories and things. But is it? Why?
It sounds gross. It just sounds gross, man.
I quite like little bleeders. I thought it was quite sweet. No? I guess it changed it. Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it's an American thing. Maybe we just hear that and we're like, ugh. Or maybe it's just me. I don't know. But I do know that there's sources. And that was one thing I was going to ask about because So you get sources from cons where people talk to creators, and then the creators, or then the little bleeders, quote unquote, send it on to you.
It's rare, but we do a few things to happen. We mostly use people who are like Bleeding Cool press reps with like badges and stuff, and identify as Bleeding Cool.
Okay.
And if I get anything like that about a retailer, a creator, if I can, I'll try and contact the creator before and said, "This is what someone said. Is this right? Is this accurate?
Right.
Is there anything else you want to add?" That kind of thing.
So there's no subterfuge going on.
Just that on its own. It should never just be that on its own. It should actually have something else. And sometimes we've fallen foul of someone who's misrepresented themselves. That has happened in the past. It's something we try and make sure doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I remember that kind of being a thing, and I remember my initial reaction was like, that kind of sucks, because like, let's say I want to talk to X creator at like Emerald City Comic Con because I'm going there in March or April, I guess it is, and like I was just like, will the idea of like me potentially being a little bleeder like will that play into their mind? But it sounds like it's less of a subterfuge thing and more of occasional mishaps with that.
I would say so. However, even if that does happen, in my head, I've got this idea. Imagine it was Tom Cruise at the Comic-Con leaning over to John Travolta and saying, "Hey, John, do you want to go down to this gay bar tonight?" Not that they would, but maybe that would happen. We're going to meet Leonardo DiCaprio there. Would you expect, if someone to do that, for some of the people in that crowd to go, "Oh, that's interesting. I might tell a newspaper that story then."
Right, that's true.
I mean, to some degree, and I'm not going to say this always the case. To some degree, if you are a major comic book creator, and if you're having indiscreet conversations about projects you're working on the floor of a comic convention center, you might expect that might get picked up by a couple of people.
Right.
Mark Waid, I think he says that anything he says on the walk around a convention floor, he expects it to be purely like public domain. It could be picked up. It might not be. It probably won't be. But he always behaves as if he would. If you get to a certain level of being a comic book creator, if you're Frank Cho, if you're David Finch, if you're Jeff Johns, probably actually watching what you say when you're at your booth or at the company table or that kind of thing is probably going to be part of the job, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
To some degree. Now, I said, if I got anything like that, I would then contact the creator involved and say, "This is what's been said. Is this accurate? Is there a problem?" If I was able to, that was. But there has to be some responsibility, I think, taken by the creators, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is just kind of interesting because, like, that is one of the cool things about cons is being able to go to a table and to talk to these people and just have like frank conversations. But at the same time, like, I guess that is true across really any industry. If like you were saying, like if some celebrity was like, turns out he was like a Hydra agent or something like that, or something ridiculous, like, like I was totally expecting you to say Tom Cruise leaned into John Travolta and say "Hail Hydra," and I'm like,
wouldn't that be cool?
Oh, that would be. So that would both mean that they are both Hydra agents and Hydra is an actual thing, which would be a hell of a thing.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it
Hydra
is
an actual thing. We know this. We've seen the films.
Oh, what?
They're documentaries. They really are. They have to be.
You know, if Hydra was actually a thing, you would be running so many stories about it. Everyone would already know about it.
Yeah, but no one would believe it.
Who's his source?
Johnston again. All this nonsense about Hydra. No one believes it. That's not the reason they cancelled the Fantastic Four. It wasn't Hydra's involvement. What's going on? He's making it all up. So yeah.
So, okay, I want to ask about when the all new, all different books were announced. You actually got to that. I think you got like the book from a retailer like a day or two.
I didn't, but someone did, and they basically copied a few paragraphs down and emailed me as an email. I got this nice big email that I woke up to and went, "Ooh, that's quite good. That is."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know you're a site that deals in rumors and in getting this information out first, but how do you balance, like, because I know a lot of Marvel, like, PR people and marketing people put a lot of time and effort into that. Like, how do you balance, like, kind of, not that this is like a huge thing for you because you're a news site. How do you balance kind of burning their efforts for the purpose of breaking a story early?
I don't care about the PR.
Right.
Why? What news organization would care about the PR?
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That's not. I mean, listen. Spoiling stories, impacting the reader. That's fair enough. I can talk about that. I have issues there, and I will judge things on that basis. But if it's just PR, if it's spoiling PR, I've got no problem with spoiling PR.
Mm-hmm.
It's PR. It's not the thing. That's the sizzle. That's not the steak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm happy to do sizzle. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, the sizzle is how they're selling this book. This is how they're selling these things,
Hmm.
and that's no. I've got no problems or concerns about that at all.
Well, and that information is coming out one way or another. It's not like you're revealing something deep and
Oh,
dark.
and let's be fair. Marvel PR had been running one story per day about a number of these books in all these other big news websites and things. And I knew they had some lined up that day. I think CBR had the X-Men stuff because they clearly can't give the X-Men to anybody who's actually important. Not important, but in terms of Hollywood Reporter or Variety or
because they're burying them a little bit.
Indeed. So yeah, all this stuff came to me. I thought, right, there we go. That's the day's story sorted. And so I started to put those out. And yeah, clearly some people at Marvel really didn't like that.
I did think that was
true. I mean, that's another thing. It was true. Right. I wasn't spoiling any actual story. It got a lot of people excited.
Mm-hmm.
It became the trending story on Twitter and Facebook. Everyone was talking about Marvel, just like last week. Everyone was talking about DC on that day.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell you what, if I did that for Valiant, I'd get sexual favors. I'm sure of it.
I don't think Hunter Goranson would be very happy about that idea.
But no, he might not be happy, but he'd do it.
Hunter.
Dinesh told him.
Hunter, he does not mean that. He does not mean that. But I do think it is really hilarious. Like it is funny when they get, people would get upset with you, but at the same time, like you were saying, like they had this book that they announced and made a big deal of, that they were going to be revealing all of the all new, all different line first in this book that will be going out to retailers. And I was like, that's a little weird. And then they're like, we're going to give everything to like Mashable, like 2 weeks beforehand.
Yes.
It's just kind of a funny thing. It's like, I don't know, like the idea of controlling sources is such a fascinating thing, especially given the fact that like they made a big to-do about making this a retailer first thing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, that was a useful, that's quite useful to hide behind, obviously, I have to say. But it is true. That certainly was a definitely justifiable cause for it. It was like, well, yes, you said you do all this just for retailers and you didn't. And this is the day before. So, yeah. And retailers, from what I understand, were very happy.
That you sent it out?
There, because it was all up there. People were talking about it. People came into the store asking about it. And when they came into the store, they could pick up this magazine, which had all these things that could then prove what they'd just been reading about.
Mm-hmm.
And the retailers were very happy.
Well, and I imagine the retailers weren't super happy about like being told that they were going to have this book that was going to reveal everything. And then they're like, Mashable, Uncanny Inhumans.
Exactly.
Not that anyone cares about Inhumans anyways, but.
Indeed, exactly. So I think almost like for certain retailers, the Bleeding Cool thing was, well, they enjoyed it going the other way. I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely.
It was balancing the scales.
A bit, maybe. It also helped that there was some pretty cool stuff in there, so that also worked out well.
I've recently called you the comic internet's Beetlejuice, except it doesn't take 3 mentions for you to show up. It's just one. Okay,
I'll go with that.
Do you have like Hootsuite running with a keyword tracking like Bleeding Cool and Rich Johnston or something? Or like, how do you decide whether or not you're going to respond to people on Twitter?
Well, first, it's one of these things that if you write the words Rich Johnston and that gets picked up on Twitter because if it's my name, it comes up as my mentions.
Right. Well, so, I mean, if they tag you, if they don't tag you though,
no, it still comes up.
What?
Ditto with Bleeding Cool. It still comes up. So I have a look and see what's going on. The other thing is, if someone's saying something that's just clearly fake, not true or false or offensive or whatever, I'll at least try and get a response in there. Google is forever. Even if they've blocked you, their followers might not be. It's useful at least to get an answer in there. Mm-hmm. They might not be one they want. They might not believe it. They may hate it. But I want at least that side to be there. I take the viewpoint that Twitter is publishing. If you're publishing an opinion, a statement, whatever it is, I think a right to reply is fair enough. And that's how it legally and effectively it is. It is publishing. If you were to publish any thesis about anyone and they were to respond to it, I think that would be expected. Some people don't like that. Some people like the idea that they post something and there's no response from the person it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is, then that's a terrible thing. and I don't hold with that at all.
I do think it's interesting. Like there was actually a big conversation about not you, but like just the concept of vanity searching on Twitter yesterday. And it is an interesting discussion.
Everyone does it.
Oh, okay.
I do it. I bet you do it.
Oh, I totally do it. I am. I don't. I don't respond though. I try not to respond.
I see. You've only gone so far. Now there are some degrees you can also go too far, and some people clearly can go too far. Maybe I've done that too far.
I think some people are aggressive. And I think that's where it becomes a problem.
We're talking Dan Slott, aren't we? Let's
I didn't say nothing. This will not be a fanboy rampage. I will not be on your website.
Read your web lines. But yes, okay. Sometimes, yeah, you can see, yeah, that's too far. But again, some people will say what I've done is definitely too far. I'm sure. But I think it's important to, and I don't think someone should be judged by replying to something that someone said about them at all. In fact, I think it should be expected.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying something about someone publicly online, it's not a hidden thing. It's not behind any kind of firewall or whatever. Then yeah, I think you should expect a response. And certainly I would.
I have to say one of my favorite things recently was, I don't know if you saw it, but The Beat ran an article about the mistreatment of women characters on Arrow, and Mark Guggenheim himself responded and was like, no. And I love that.
No, absolutely. And I'm thinking, well, they should have expected that, surely. My biggest worry is, why don't they actually ask him for a quote first?
Oh, I don't, like that's the thing is, I think people put getting quotes in, like, I mean, as you know, you like most creators and retailers and publishers, well, not all publishers, but like a lot of them will give you quotes if you ask for them. I think a lot of times people just don't want to approach people. It's easy, just do it.
Absolutely. I'm the biggest fan. On a legal standpoint, it's really good as well. Because if you write something that's terribly offensive and they reply to it and you give them a reply, then there's a lot harder for them to then sue you for libel afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But for general purposes, I always think, at least if there is another side, get it. You don't have to agree with it. Put it in there. At least give the biggest breadth of opinion available for the reader. Yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of article. Yeah, they should have talked to someone like Mark Guggenheim for him to say, no, that's absolutely not true at the end of the article.
Right.
It makes it an article. Suddenly, it's not just this show mistreats its female characters. The article is now the creator Mark Guggenheim denies that this show treats its women creators badly. What's a better headline?
Yeah,
I think it's the one with Guggenheim in it.
I do think it's interesting, like that. I don't know. I mean, like somebody like The Beat. And I'm not to defame The Beat. I love The Beat, but like like
The Beat is my favorite gossip column in comics.
They could. I mean, Guggenheim would respond to them.
Yeah. Oh no, he's totally he's one of the big responders. He's always online. Whenever we write anything about Green Arrow, whatever Arrow, he'll be retweeting it. We always see that goes up. He's very active. He's easy to get a response from.
Mm-hmm.
Too easy. So
I have to say I was pretty proud of myself for coming up with you're the Beetlejuice of comics.
I'll take it.
You'll take it.
I preferred Candyman, but Beetlejuice will do just as well.
Candyman's creepy, man. No way. Candyman.
Can I be creepy?
No, that's scary. I didn't like Candyman. Legitimately scared me as a kid. I wouldn't make a reference to him.
Okay, I've got to say, Beetlejuice is a lot cooler. So yeah, I'll definitely take Beetlejuice.
He is cooler, but Candyman is definitely more threatening. I don't know if you want threatening or cool, but the only time I ever 100% disagreed with something you ran was you posted a private correspondence between the Rainbow Hub's Emma Hubois, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Graphic Policy's Brett Shanker, in which they discussed you and your site.
Yes, they did.
So here's my question: how do you justify running that story?
How do I justify it?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's about you, but I mean, how is that news?
I thought it was new. Well, it's lifting the lid on the behind-the-scenes processes of the comic book industry, and it was sent to me by a member of that list, who was absolutely outraged at what these guys were doing and planning, which is, as far as I can tell, a series of attacks and assaults on a variety of targets around the industry, without the justification one might expect. And yeah, then this was one example of it. And it was basically purely lifting the lid on the behind-the-scenes processes of things that were being planned. You only see the tip of the iceberg. This gave you the other 90%. And I thought it was fascinating. I was interested in it. I broke no confidences. No one sent it to me in any kind of privacy. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. It was absolutely newsworthy. I ran it. Also knew it would be a thing, and I knew some people would have big issues with it. I've run other private correspondence in similar terms like that in the past. I think when Kurt Busiek went off on one about Jonathan Hickman's run on Fantastic Four in a private mailing list. Again, I thought that was fascinating. It was leaked to me by someone who was really quite incensed by it. So that's what usually happens. Usually in these kind of private mailing things, I mean, I'm never going to break anything that I'm a member of.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone does something so outrageous that a member of that group just can't take it anymore and leaks it, yeah, I'm going to run it.
But I guess the difference between that for like let's say the Buziak and Hickman thing versus like the one you ran is it seemed to me, it kind of seemed like revenge to a certain degree to what they were saying. I mean, they're not like Al Qaeda, they're not a terrorist cell or something like that. They're just, it seemed like more like they were just talking about you. And I guess I didn't see
other people. They were trying to get people fired. There was all sorts of issues involved there. There was basically it was a planned assault. However way you want to fake it, that would have had real world implications into people's lives, and I was able to utterly throw a spanner in it, I guess. To that degree, that's maybe what's what happened. But to be honest, if it had been about any other site and any other person or any other aspect, I'd have still have run it because I thought it was a fascinating look at that kind of activity. It's the Sony WikiLeaks. It was exactly that. If it was anything else, it was a behind-the-scenes look at how these things are done, how these things are planned, plotted, and put together. And these things don't just emerge; they're planned. These are the people involved. This is the process it goes through. And that will be just the same for that piece of correspondence, and say Isaac Perlmutter's discussion of the likelihood of about which women would or would not be suitable for movies, or all that stuff. And I ran a whole bunch of Sony WikiLeaks stuff. That some stuff is still fascinating, and there's still bits and pieces of that coming out every now and then. So yeah, it's basically sometimes stuff gets leaked, and if it's really newsworthy, I'm going to run it.
Sure.
And people are going to hate that. I don't know if it's the principle they hate or the people involved that they don't like getting exposed. Because that's the other thing. If I'd run that about, say, people on the opposite side, let's say it was a Gamergate, a private conversation that I'd been leaked, and they're talking about taking down certain comic book creators who are more favoured, there would have been a lot less complaints.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I don't know. I mean, I guess just seeing that, it was hard for me, I guess, as an outsider to see the merit in doing that. That I just thought it was an interesting, incident in the history of Bleeding Cool.
Sure, absolutely. But it's not one. I certainly knew it was going to be controversial. I had to think about it for a hell of a long time. But in the end, I thought it was the case. Actually, that was the thing. If this was about CBR and not Bleeding Cool, would I still run it? And the answer was absolutely. I would.
You would have done that in a heartbeat.
Well, no. Again, I would still have had to think about it because when it comes into that, because there are. It's true. There are certain privacies that have been invaded, not the ones that I've done, but certainly some people have acted on that behalf. And so I had to think about it an awful lot, and I talked to a few people before I did it as well, just to bounce it off people, and not everyone agreed with that either. So again, there was different opinions, but in the end, it was because I'm going to press that button.
I guess
I knew I'd get a hell of a lot of grief for it. I knew that would happen, but I think it was justifiable. And like I said, if it had been about and who's that kind of like? Is it Beyond Comics, that site that's a little bit more conservative in its thinking?
Oh God, I have no idea.
I would have totally still have run it, and there would have been far fewer complaints. I think most of the complaints were due to the people involved and the people who were complaining relationship to them.
Right. I do think it's an interesting. Like the last two questions have been like a question of like, is there really like private space on the internet anymore? And to a certain degree, there isn't really. Like if you say something, it's going to possibly come out. And
well, I think there is. I mean, there is. There absolutely is private space on the internet. It's just there's always a possibility that someone in your private space may make that public. So it's still, who are you sharing this? Who is a member of your private space?
That's why I only write my
everything. This could be the truth about. This could be in your living room. All these big kind of celebrity stories that have been sold to the papers by someone's brother-in-law, that kind of thing. These things. This is just a reflection of the real life, the physical space as well. I don't think there's anything special about the internet in that way, apart from that it's easier to cut and paste. That's basically what it comes down to.
So are you saying that I should be worried about my journal where I write all of my deep, dark secrets about DC Rebirth and her sending them to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely have a lot of worries about that.
Oh God, I gotta get my wife off her phone right now. She's gonna totally send them on. Okay, so last question.
She's a great source. Don't knock her.
I knew it. She was a little. Oh God, I don't want to say it. I almost said it.
A lot of it comes down to what it is. Is it a story?
Right.
And most stuff isn't a story. I don't think hardly anyone's got anyone to worry about the privacy in that case. Even on a bigger scale, when you look at things like Facebook and Google, and all the concerns about privacy there, most people don't actually have anything to worry about, but some people do.
That's why I try to.
They kind of know about it as well. That's the other thing. If you've got something that you don't want other people to know about, then yeah, you probably know that already. So
that's why I'm the most boring person on social media, because I don't want to be on any website besides my own, in which case I still get people yelling at me. But so the last question I want to ask you about is, you know, like I said, you have your own perspective on things. You've been doing this for a long time. I'm curious, how do you feel about where comics are these days? Like both the industry and the medium. Do you think it's doing well as a whole, or do you think how do you think things are?
Oh, as a medium, it's never better.
Right.
I don't think there's been a time in the history of comic books as a medium where there's been better work available to buy, to read, and the people creating it. I think we are at a creative height. Just as always, though, there's Sturgeon's law always applies, and 95% of everything is crud, and that's still the same now. Maybe it's 94%. There's a lot of really good stuff being published. I'm so happy about that. Now, the industry itself reflects that differently. And that goes through its own ups and downs, and it's never been that great. Often been very popular. Sometimes it's less popular than others. We're now getting to a stage, I think, where superhero fans, who in the past just could only buy the comics because that's all there was, superhero fans have now got other options with TV and film and cartoons and video games far more than they used to have. That's going to cause pressure. That's causing pressures clearly on a market that's been based around the superhero comic book. And the worry is, can it successfully? Can there be a transition from one model to the other? Will the publishers reflect that easier? The comic books industry is not the comic book shops. The comic book industry is not Diamond. There's an awful lot of people who try to make them one and the same thing, and it's very useful for me to write about this kind of thing as well. So they're very useful for me that they're there, but that is not the same thing. And if every single comic shop went away, comics would not go away, and comic book publishing wouldn't go away. It would change. And I think we're in that kind of transition stage, and I don't know where it's going to go. Is it going to hang on and become as popular as it is? I mean, the thing is, the comic book industry, the comic book store, Diamond, are still doing pretty well.
Yeah,
so it has done at some points in its past, but it's found a way to survive. It's the only industry that's managing to keep print going. I was talking to people at DC, and they were telling me that digital has plateaued. Print is rising.
Right. I actually have an article or interview with Eric Stevenson that's going up tomorrow or Monday, where he says very similar thing.
Well, there we go.
Don't run that story.
Stevenson is one of the growth points. He can look at him as one of the major growth points of comic books. He is, in many ways, shepherding. He's midwife to the future of the American comic book industry. I think he's such an important figure. And if he would respond to people's emails quicker, that would be even more so. But he is so on the ball with so much. The stuff that he's managing to push through into the mainstream consciousness in comic books is incredible. Image is publishing comics that couldn't have been published by anyone 20 years ago. I'm remembering the fuss that was made over. Do you remember the fuss that was made over Miracle Man 9 when it was published, the birth issue of that? I mean, that was the thing that Steve Geppi said could never even be distributed or sold in comic stores at one point. And now that would be standard fare.
Yeah, that stuff would show up in Saga, which is arguably the most popular comic these days.
Absolutely, but many others as well. It's not just that kind of comic. It would just be expected. It's just part of the thing now. So that's really interesting, and that's broadening what comic books can do. And the fact that Image is now the things that Image are doing would have been illegal or would have been so shunned previously. It's now just become part of the way things go. I think is an amazing achievement. He has expanded the potential for comics in mainstream America further than anyone else I know. and all power to him. He really is kind of a hero of the comic book industry. But the something someone did tell me though is that I always think this shows the fragility of that comic book industry is if the comic book market drops by 10%, then half the comic book stores in the country close. They're that close.
Wow.
10% drop, then you lose half. If you lose half, then you end up losing everything because basically Marvel sales drop in half and DC sales drop in half. You lose everything. So if you lose half, the whole thing collapses. And then there has to be something else there to take it instead. I mean, there's digital, but that's not enough. So I don't know. I look at, I mean, again, I'm talking about Image. It's arguable that Image, or specifically The Walking Dead, saved Diamond. There's a time when it looked like Diamond were going to be going bust again, and Diamond Book Distributors was on its knees, and then The Walking Dead collection started happening. And at one point, 1 in every 2 graphic novels being sold by Diamond Book Distributors was Walking Dead. That put it on its feet. I mean, you could see Walking Dead literally saved the Diamond Distributors at one point. And that's a story that I think has yet to be properly told.
No, I've never heard that before.
Again, you need to read Bleeding Cool more. But there are more of these kind of stories that I'm seeing. And again, I still keep looking to Image as being the savior of the comic book industry, and Eric Stevenson as our messiah.
Wow.
Not too much?
Nah, I feel like that might have been a step too far. I mean, I like Eric, don't get me wrong.
What's one of those warning? I once had a comic book published by Image, so there's that.
Oh, there you go.
Say that. But make sure that's kind of clear. I don't want anyone accusing me of bias or anything like that. So there's it's in flux. There's lots of good things. There's lots of bad things. It's either going to change and look nothing like it used to look, or it's going to look exactly the same. One of those two. So I'm a bit hedging my bets.
But it's not going away anytime soon.
No, and comics isn't going away at all.
Yeah.
It's people are always going to be drawing pictures and putting words to them. Comics will always exist. It's just it's the natural art form to create. It's the one that kids do first, and I think that's always going to be there. People are always going to be making comics and reading them. They might not be paying for them, but we'll see how that goes.
All right, Rich. Well, that's actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and answering my wide breadth of questions. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Rich Johnston, on Twitter at Rich Johnston and on his site, Bleeding Cool, every day. You can find more sketch content at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at SketchComic. Like us on Facebook at /Sketched. And if you're an iTunes listener, give us a rating or review on there. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.